some housekeeping before we start. This is going to be an audience participation talk. Ha ha. If my hand is up when I ask a question, yell it out. If it isn't up, try not to spoil it for people that are trying to work it out beside you. There is going to be a lot of code. We are going to be going through 16 different languages today. So if you can see the text in green and blue on this screen, then that's really good. The tiny text isn't as important, but make sure you can see it. There is going to be a bunch of JavaScript in this talk because the title kind of has the word JavaScript in it. The input is going to be prefaced with a lovely little accent, and output is not going to have any prefix on it. There'll be some comments, which are the double slashes, which is just commentary, and some highlights will be in blue and bold. All right, let's get started. Hi, I'm Katie, also known as Glazant on the internet. You may have heard of me. If you've read my speaker bio, it says that when I'm not changing the world, I enjoy cooking, making tapestries, and yelling at JavaScript and its attempt at global variables. Yeah, many eons ago when I was first writing my speaker bio, I was yelling a bit at JavaScript on the same day because every time I go back into JavaScript, global variables trip me up every single time. Let me show you what I mean. If we have a variable, say ands, and we initialize that variable with an empty string, we can then create a function that references that variable, sets it to 42, and returns it. So if I call this function and print out the result of this function, it'll be nothing, right? Because I haven't actually run the function yet, I've just asked for answer. But if I actually run the function, then I get 42. And then if I ask for my result again, I get nothing. This is because of this little wonderful var, which every time I write raw JavaScript from scratch, I forget to put the var or try to put the var, and it's just, oh, this little bug trips me up every single time. JavaScript. You know what's also fun in JavaScript? Duck typing. If you don't know what duck typing is, if it looks like a duck and if it sounds like a duck and it walks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Because in JavaScript, haha, JavaScript is fun. So, first example of audience participation. What is 4 plus 2? 6, wonderful. What is 4 minus 2? 2, yay. What is the string 4 minus 2? 2. This isn't a trick question. What's the string 4 plus 2? Yay, everyone's really smart. You know what else is also fun? Ha, equality. Is 0 integer equal to the Boolean false? Yes. Is the integer 1 equal to the string 1? Yes. True, because I'm using double equals. What I should be using is triple equals, where none of these things are equivalent. You think that's fun? Arrays and objects. Ha. So, what is the concatenation of two empty arrays? Empty string. What is the concatenation of an empty array and an empty object? Object. Wonderful, from the person at the back. What about if we reverse that order? What is the concatenation of an empty object and an empty array? 0. And what is the concatenation of two empty objects? No. Not a number. What? Who here has seen the WAT talk? Yeah. That last example I pulled directly and I don't care. The rest of this talk though is going to be the little hidden WATs, the little tiny things that you don't see and you accidentally trip up on, because there are so many sneaky edge cases in JavaScript, it's delightful. So more importantly, we're going to discuss not just the edge cases, we're going to talk about why. So, for starters, JavaScript is a registered trademark of Oracle. Yeah. So, back in the day, before tables and HTML, before YouTube, before all the things, there was this thing called Netscape. Who remembers Netscape? Oh yeah. All right, so, last time I gave this talk, I got this wrong and Brendan Ike corrected me on Twitter. So, Originally trademarked by Netscape back in the day, but because of acquisitions and company changings, the trademark was held by Sun eventually, and then Sun got bought by Oracle, so that's why it's now Oracle. Yeah, Brendan Eich, by the way, created JavaScript. I got well actually by the creator of JavaScript on Twitter. High five. All right. Also, if you didn't know, JavaScript was created in just 10 days and had no concept of versioning, which is why we get small issues. But technically, what we're using in the browser isn't JavaScript. It's ECMAScript. This is the working name that they used during the standardization, and since they couldn't think of a better one, most people just keep on calling it JavaScript or ECMAScript. ECMA is actually a standardization body, so it's their script. Anyway, if you can think of a better name, don't, because there's too many names already. Just call it Node, whatever. I'm going to use the two terms interchangeably, but I mean the same language. So, regardless of whatever you call it, it is the most popular language ever. There are more JavaScript users in the world than there are developers of any other language, because everyone uses a browser, right? And if you know how to turn off JavaScript, you are in a small minority. So we're just going to assume everyone uses JavaScript. And since there's so many users, there's going to be much more noise about it, especially because it's really easy to get started development in JavaScript. And because there's more people and there's more noise, you're going to hear a lot of bad things in the noise. So let's go back to those examples from earlier and describe and explain exactly what's going on. Starting with global variables. What we had here was a problem of our scope of answer. The top instance of answer was a global variable, but the one within our function was local. So if we're changing our local, it's not going to affect the global. The reason I get confused with this all the time is because it's the other way around in every other language, where by default everything is local unless you make it global, including Ruby, Python, and Java, you know, the three main languages that everyone uses, right? Yeah, no, not really. But yeah, the issue that we had with our math earlier is because of the overloaded plus operand. So what was going on here is we were having concatenation attempts against different types. So we were having a concatenation in the bottom example of a string and a number, but if you concatenate anything to a string, the string wins, because strings are easy, or it's all based on Java logic, and I can't remember my Java 101 from mumble years ago in uni. It's type coercion, it's fun, it's awful, but it's fun. It also comes up in the equality example because the original version of the double equals decided to ignore types, which means that there now has to be a triple equals, and nobody remembers the triple equals. I'm never going to mention triple equals again if the lighting's going to do that. Just always use triple equals. I'm sorry. Okay. There are some other interesting quirks of JavaScript, such as parseInt. If I wanted to parse the string 42 with parseInt, what will the result be? 42. If I wanted to use the same function call on 42 Wallaby Way, what is the result going to be? 42. Because the parsing stops as soon as it hits a non-numeric character in the string. Which means that we could then say parse 04. What is the parseInt of 04 as a string going to be? 4. What is the parseInt of 08 as a string going to be? 0. Because by default parseInt has another parameter in there, which is the radix. By default, the string 04 is going to be assumed to be octal because it starts with a 0. And 04 in octal is just 4. But 08 in octal is invalid. Let's talk about numbers. What is 4 plus 2? 6. What is 40 plus 20? 60. What is 0.4 plus 0.2? 0.6.00001, because every single number in JavaScript is a float. Let's talk about Unicode. If we wanted to split the string ABC and split it by an empty string, we would get an array of A and B and C. If we wanted to split a string of a snake emoji and a bee emoji, what would we get? What is the length of the array we would get? Well, because JavaScript was originally created before Unicode existed. So if you actually want to do proper tokenization of strings into their separate characters, you need to use array.from, and then you get out your emoji properly. Haha. Speaking of arrays, this thing. What is this? Right, so let's step through this. Before we went through this, an empty array is an empty string. If you put a unary addition in front of an empty string, you get 0. If you have an empty string and an empty string, it's actually the array of an empty string, which is an empty string, empty string. But if you take an empty string within an empty string, and then you have an index of 0, you end up with empty string, but then you can increment that after you cast it to a number. And then you have your 1, and all you do is just add your 0 from before onto it, and you get 10. Which means we can do this. Who would want to arbitrarily run this code on their website? I don't know, it's just a string. What's wrong? It's fine, yeah. Which means that just with those 6 characters you can code anything. Anything. Yeah, try doing the search for that regex in your intrusion detection systems. Yeah. All right, type of, haha. Remember how I said JavaScript was created in 10 days? Yes, okay. What is the type of this object? What is it? It's an object, yay. What is the type of this array? Object. What? Okay, let's just simplify this down. What is the type of object? Object. What is the type of a number? Number. These aren't tricks. Okay, I swear, like, what is the type of the string object? String. What is the type of a Boolean object? Boolean. What is the type of null? Object. Wait, what? Haha. So, this is fun. Who's familiar with raw C? Oh, hello. I'm talking to all half dozen of you in the audience. Hi. This is going to be fun. So, the problem is that object has a tag in front of any object in the raw binary lowest down assembly kind of stuff as 0x0. The problem is a null pointer is also 0x0. So when the raw C code of JavaScript goes through and it goes, there's a great big if then else tree it goes through to work out what type an object is. It starts off and it goes, are you a void? No, you're not a void, let's keep going. Are you an object? Does the tag at the start match the tag that I know is object? It'll see if it's a function because that's a bit special, but it'll hit the else with null because the tags are the same. And then it'll escape out the end of the tree. This is a very, very old bug. It's also a very, very old, well-known bug. And the problem, there are no versions in JavaScript. You have no idea what you're running. You can't tell your browser which version to run. So every single version of JavaScript runs and it updates, and everything has to work backwards compatibility back to the days before there were animated cat GIFs on the internet. Who remembers those days before animated cat GIFs? Yeah. The world is a much better place with animated cat GIFs. And yes, you can quote me on Twitter on that. If any of these bugs were to be fixed, the internet would break. And not just Kim Kardashian break, I mean proper break. So with all these things that I've mentioned, it's not that JavaScript isn't awful, it's awful, full of awe. There are lots of issues with JavaScript and all these other weird edge cases involved. And as long as you know them, you're fine. But if you don't, then you get fun stuff with your everything, really. So just don't use JavaScript. Image sliders, modals, lightboxes, form validations, form uploads can all be done now with just HTML5 and CSS3. So don't use JavaScript. HTML5 as well allows you to use WebSockets, events, service workers, web storage, all native in HTML5. So just don't use JavaScript. Or you could use JavaScript without using JavaScript. Because JavaScript is the only language you can put in a browser, you can just compile your other languages into JavaScript. Now I say the only language you can use. Who remembers the language browser wars? Who remembers Flash and ActiveX? Aren't you glad that JavaScript won? Pick a language, any language, and you can compile, there's probably a project to compile that language down into base JavaScript. Who here does Ruby? Ruby, you've got Opal, you've got Red, you've got many other languages. Who here uses PHP? You've got Unity, you've got Fipe? Fipe, yes, let's call it Fipe. With Perl, you've got multiple choices. In Go, you've got Go for JS. In Python, you've got a few choices. And you've also got this one, which is one that I helped build, and it's really cute and has a bee. It's a cute bee. I have to have a bee. The bees are cute. In Haskell, you've got a couple of choices. You've got haste. In COBOL, you can compile COBOL into JavaScript. You can do it. Whether you'd want to is up to your use case. In C, if you have C code, you can compile that down, which means, who here remembers Windows 3.1 ski program? This is the Internet Archive. This is a JavaScript application downloading local game data into my browser over Australian internet. This is Internet Archive running an emulator. No, it's not. It is not showing on the screen. That is annoying. One moment. There we go. All right, I'm gonna watch. All right, so this is Internet Archive downloading a whole bunch of data over Australian internet, so it takes a while. This is just downloading JavaScript. This is running an emulation of DOSBox in my browser. This is running an emulation of Windows 3.1 in DOSBox in my browser. This is running an emulation of SkiFree in DOSBox in Windows 3.1 in my browser. And it's wonderful. Jump! One thing though, this particular emulation of SkiFree is broken because the clock rates are different and the Yeti will get you at the end. Sorry. And this is all done automatically using Inscripton and Asm.js. This is all magic. Well, not magic, it's merely the scary application of science, but anyway. See, you have all these things that can go into JavaScript to make you run in a browser. I mean, that means that any other language is fine, right? Well, you could use another language. But every language has its own issues. Every other language has WATs. Lightning round. Let's talk about Ruby. In Ruby, this particular line of code breaks because Ruby doesn't have bare words. However, there is a magic method in Ruby called method missing. Anytime you run a thing that it can't find out what you mean, you can run this instead, which means that if you define the method missing, all of a sudden, Ruby understands what you mean when you don't actually mean a thing. This is scary and magic and exactly how Rails 2.0 worked, because you would never declare any of your methods when you were traversing your data model. It would tokenize your string in your method name and work it out for you, which means you could never search your code to find where the bug was because your functions don't exist. It is terrifying as a new developer when you work that out. Absolutely terrifying. Let's talk about Ruby. In Ruby, if we have not true, $& false, is this going to be true? Is this going to be false? For the true? For the false? False. Not true and false. Is this going to be true? Is this going to be false? The order of operations in Ruby means that there is not in between the two forms of and or, which means that you cannot just replace the word and the ampersand and because your order of operations changes. Let's talk about Haskell. Hi Haskell people. What is the length of the array 1, 2?
1, and it's arbitrary.
You're skipping to the next example, Rob. The length of an array with 2 elements is 2, duh. What's the length of that then? 1. This is because length applies across that object as a foldable or something, and it reduces and type safety or something. Anyway, let's talk about Haskell. In Haskell, if I declare A as being the sum of 2 and 2, what is A? 4. If I declare B as being the sum of 2 and 2, where 2 plus 2 equals 5, what is B? 5. In Haskell, you can just change math. Wait, is this what Malcolm Turnbull uses? Let's talk about Pascal, which is completely different to Haskell. In Pascal, you can define a program. You can have a program called boop. You declare a var x to be an integer. You start off with x as 41, and then you go plus equals 1, and then you write out what x equals. What is the result of this program going to be? Is it going to be 42? Is it going to be true? Correct. Is it going to be false? It's going to be true. Because Pascal is one of those wonderful languages where a single equal sign actually means equality instead of assignment. I mean, math, right? Because in math, equals is equality. And as a programmer, it's like, no, equals is assigning. No, math, math, math. Let's talk about bash. What is 4 plus 2 in bash? No, that's okay, because what we can do is we can just wrap that around a function call. So what is 4 plus 2 wrapped around the function call? That's okay, we can just wrap it around again. What is a double wrap 4 plus 2? Math. Let's talk about Elixir. In Elixir, if I want to map on a range of 1 to 5 a square root function, I get an array that is the incremental square roots. If I want to do this for a different range, from instead of going 1 to 5, do it 6 to 10, I get a string. This may have been fixed, but in Elixir, ranges sometimes get interpreted as strings. Let's talk about C++. In C++, if I want to print out this string, what do I get? How many punctuation characters do I get? Do I get all of them? I get whack pipe. Because C++ was developed in a time before question marks and exclamation marks were part of, yeah, I have a face palm. It was created before these things existed in the base code set, which means that there are these wonderful things called trigraphs where there's an ISO standard that has only 3 numbers in it, so it's like one of the really early ones before 9001 and stuff, to define these characters that didn't exist. You preface them with 2 question marks, which really doesn't work for millennials. Let's talk about Python. If I declare a variable A as being 256 and a variable B as being 256, is A B true? False? It's true. This isn't a trick question. Come on. If I declare a variable A as being 257 and B as being 257, is AB true? False? If I declare a variable A is equal to 257 and a variable B is equal to 257, is AB true? False? Let's talk about Java. In Java, if I declare an integer A as being 1024 and an integer B as being 1024, is A less than or equal to B true? False? True. Is A greater than or equal to B true? False? True. Is A B? Let's talk about Scala. In Scala, what is the print statement that's going to be returned if I print the concatenation of an object and an empty string? Scala. Let's talk about Swift. In Swift, if I have an array that has a whole bunch of objects, and all I want to do is print out the amount of objects that I have within that object, cats. If I time that and try to print it out, what's the count of that list? How many cats have I got? 15. This isn't a trick question. Just took 10 minutes or 15 minutes to work it out. This has been fixed because there was a small issue in Swift where complex static objects were quadratically more complex to iterate over, which meant that if I added a 16th cat in there, it would go up to an hour. Let's talk about Perl. In Perl, if I have an if statement that wants to check the equality between foo and bar, if they're equal, print true, else print false. Is foo equal to bar true? False. In Perl, double equals is numeric equality. It casts them to numbers. Foo and bar are both 0. Let's talk about PHP. In PHP, we can use ternary operators. This means that if we were to have a true statement, we would execute the true branch. If it's false, we would execute the false branch. So, in this case, it would be true. Because it's true, it'll go to the left side. If it's false, it'll go to the right. If it's false, it'll go to the right. That's fine. If you're chaining them, If I have a false, and then I have another false, what am I going to print out? 1, 2, 3. 3. Okay. If I have false, and then in my second branch I have true, am I going to print out 1, 2, 3? 2. If I have true as the first one and true as the second part of my branch, am I going to print out 1, 2, 3? Ternary operators in PHP are left associative. That is not mathematically accurate. Thankfully, PHP has versioning. It's fine. Let's talk about PowerShell. In PowerShell, if I want to compare whether the integer 2 is greater than the integer 1, I want to print out true if it is and false if it isn't. Is this going to print out true? False. True. 2 is greater than 1. I'm not tricking you. If I want to check whether the integer 2 is less than the integer 1, will it print out true? Yeah. All languages have quirks. I'm sorry. Using another language isn't going to save you. JavaScript is no exception to this. It's awful, but it is evolving. Who's played with JavaScript outside the browser before? How cool is that? Oh my God, you can use it everywhere, right? You can use Node.js, and it's absolutely infallible. It works every single, no, it doesn't. There is a bug, well, may have been fixed by now, in the universal or isomorphic version of JavaScript in the V8 JavaScript engine. If I have a function and all I'm doing in my function is returning the addition of the 2 parameters I put in, and I loop that around a couple of times to see how fast it runs, just ignore the comments. It'll take, for a couple of billion iterations, it'll take just under 2 seconds. If I remove the last line from my comment, it'll run 3 times faster. Because there's an optimization route in V8 that is based on exactly how many characters are in your function and comments count. Let's talk about package management. The Node package manager is wonderful because it means that anyone can install anything and anyone can develop anything. I'm not bringing this up just to make a cheap joke. There's a point here. Who is not familiar with leftpad and its story? All right, so JavaScript doesn't have a lot of things. It doesn't have a very good standard library. This is why you get things like jQuery and the rest of it, so you can do things like having leftpad. So with leftpad, if you have a, you have to make sure that you require leftpad to start. If you leftpad a string hello to 10 with dots, you get a length, and I've coded that wrong. That is supposed to be a string length 10, and everything else padded to the left is dots. This is how that's implemented. It's 11 lines of code. But this is code that doesn't exist in base JavaScript. You've got a check to see whether you've declared which character you want to pad, and if not, it declares a default. It'll check how many characters it needs to pad. And then for a while loop, it'll pad it. So that's fine. That's all it needs to do. This implementation is fine. The story with leftpad is the person that developed it decided to remove it from NPM, and everyone who tried to use it, all their things broke, because when you're removing something that's pretty much standard library, it causes cascading issues. Thing is, this is the implementation of the equivalent function in core Python. You have a variable instantiation for a default. It later gets replaced if you give it something to replace it with. You work out the length, see how many characters you need to pad. And then you loop for as many characters as you need to pad. This is a standard function in PHP, which means that you don't need to re-implement it. In JavaScript, you don't have a standard library, so of course you're going to have to re-implement it. Otherwise, everyone's going to have to spend their time implementing string padding. We want to be making cooler things than re-implementing the standard library. See, there are workarounds to this. jQuery, the wonderful things like that. MooTools, who remembers MooTools? Yeah! All these libraries that tried to help fill the void that JavaScript raw wasn't doing. This is because there was like about 10 years where nothing happened in JavaScript and the web was evolving, and it was a very scary, dark time. There were flash ads everywhere. There was Nginx trying to take over your computer. Now it's just like, do you want to change it? Do you want to set your location? Nope. Yes. Thing is, JavaScript is now improving, which means a lot of these problems are slowly going away, which is wonderful. A lot of what I've been talking about so far has actually been ECMAScript 3, which was created in 1999. This is like Spice Girls Y2K era. This is nearly 20 years ago. Ah, 1999. There was attempts to try to fix it. They kind of were abandoned. So ECMAScript 4 you never hear of because it never happened. I mean, this is entirely not unheard of. I mean, who here has heard of PHP 6? Yeah, PHP 6 never happened because it kind of got, which is why you go PHP 5, PHP 7. Who here has heard of Windows 9? No, trick question. So, 2009, 10 years after the original ECMAScript, we finally get updates happening. And because there's no versions, it's kind of hard to work out which version you're using, but most browsers today should at least be using ECMAScript 5, most. Which means you get fun stuff like isArray. There is finally standard functionality to work out whether your object is an array or not. And you can call it by having array.isArray and then passing it your thing. And so you can see that an object is not an array and an array is an array. It's wonderful. There's improved functionality to parseInt. This wonderful example we had earlier still breaks in version 3, but if we're using version 5, it works properly because the default radix now is 10, because most people I know count in base 10. We also get wonderful functionality like map. Who here knows what map does? Who here doesn't? All right, mapping. Mapping 101. If I have an array and I want to map that function over it, what it's doing is it's going through each item of that array and applying that function. Which means that I can do things like, instead of having to go for each element in blah, do blah, assign to new array, blah, output blah. Which means that what we end up having is an array of all these functions with the items in it, and then we process it. However, if we have an array A, which is 4 lots of 10, and then we want to map parseInt over that, parseInt has 2 parameters, which means that the mapping is going 1, okay, that's fine, 2, I don't know, 3, 4. So just remember your optional parameters when doing maps, because it'll map. It'll map even when you don't want to. Recently we've had ECMAScript 6, which most things should be using. There are a few exceptions, which means that we get let. We get let, which means my problems from the global variable days have gone. It's wonderful. If we have a function called question, and instead of using var, we use let, it means that we now finally have proper block scoping. If we try to use ands outside of that, it'll error if we use strict mode. You have to enable strict mode for a bunch of these things to happen, otherwise it'll think you're using old JavaScript. So just use strict mode, everything will yell at you, but then you'll get nice JavaScript for once, it's wonderful. Also, we're gonna get imports. We've never had imports before. Normally you have to like list every single JavaScript file you want in your HTML or concatenate them all together and then send your CDN into a twist because you've got hundreds of kilobytes of JavaScript that you're sending around the place. Now, if you export a function, you can import it in other places. Oh, it's so cool. And there's also ECMAScript 7, which is going to be an annual release upgrade for JavaScript. It's going to be so cool. And there's also 2017, which is apparently going to have padding as native. Oh, I'm so excited. So if we have this, we can do this natively now. Oh, it's so cool. Problem, it depends what browser you're using. Because there are some browsers like Edge and Internet Explorer and Safari that don't get updated very regularly. There's an entire compatibility table that you can go through and see exactly what works and what doesn't and such. Or, if you prefer fancy graphics, I have fancy graphics. Because the wonderful Mariko made this wonderful graphic. If you're using Canary or the Nightly from the Mozilla folks, you get all the code exactly as it happens, but most people are going to be using the stable versions or the ones that get updated through their app stores. So it'll take a couple of months for new things to get added, but hopefully once all the browser developers slowly start getting into the release cycles every so often, we'll see much more faster, better improvements to the JavaScript engines underneath. Oh, it'll be awesome. But if you can't wait, you can always just extend JavaScript locally yourself using Polyfills. Now, Polyfills, be wary about Polyfills. They're interesting. But if you really want pad start today, you just dump that into your JavaScript. Because what we're doing is we're modifying the string prototype to understand what pad start is and then implementing the functionality that'll soon be native anyway. You can do the same thing with, say, isArray and just have something that checks the actual equality of a parsing of an object into a string and check whether it equates that actual string. That's fine, right? No, it actually is. That's what it's under the hood. But polyfills can create problems. You're literally making your browser change its understanding of what JavaScript is. There is a wonderful technical user group finding there, which is probably out of draft mode by now. It includes a bunch of recommendations if you're going to be doing things like serving polyfills in your code, but you also need to consider the fact that you are going to be serving this to all your users of your website. People are going to be using slower devices, people are going to be using older devices, all that kind of like accessibility stuff. You have to consider accessibility. This shouldn't be shocking. So JavaScript isn't awful. It's awful. Even with its edge cases, it's powerful and it's not going anywhere. And it's important. We're going to have this for a long time. There are going to be people who think that it's terrible, and arguably, yes, it is a language with design flaws. However, during this talk, I've been talking about the technical aspects of each of the languages involved here. Never once have I mentioned the fact that anyone who develops with these languages is a terrible person. Too many talks today I've heard people bashing other languages and other people who use different platforms. Everyone needs to read this article by Oren Shaw. And if you'll indulge me, I'm going to quote from the Book of Oren, chapters 37 to 42, because everyone needs to read this and understand it. PHP communities, for example, have lacked access to the development of DevOps tooling. The use of PHP is widely derided as being insecure by default, and they are widely mocked for having an objectively bad language. Yet, people make their livings working with PHP, deploying PHP, trying to secure PHP. Don't they deserve the help that we receive to help the good practices in security-first development? These people who can't improve their work because we won't work with them and we drive them away from our communities with mockery and spite. Then they engineer things on their own because they still need the tools, and we have the gall to ask them why they didn't use these other tools. Tools that we have mocked them for asking about, telling them to get a real language, to rewrite their app, to rebuild from scratch, because their particular path was not blessed enough. I'm tired of people calling out again and again for dumping on PHP. I'm tired of people dumping on Windows, that most popular operating system, because it's not what we choose to use. We exclude people directly, all of us. Even if we don't intend to, it does not matter. We make fun of the little things that others care about, make them feel small, make them feel like their achievements didn't matter. We make them feel like they're not welcome. What can we do? Shut up. No, really, cut it out. If you need to make fun of a language, do it with your own language in your own community. JavaScript is really good at this because they are trying to help people write better code within JavaScript. Side note, it's actually working. Shh, spoilers. Find some amazing project to celebrate in a language that you're contemptuous of. Go to meetups of what you despise. Hi, I'm a Linux SRE. This is a Windows Microsoft Dev Summit. Shh. Say you don't know anything and see how welcoming they are to new people. Yeah, you've been pretty good. See what they say, what they do, and ask as if you'd be as willing to help them when they come to your meetups. Work to change your community. Ask people who try to pay for their membership in contempt to stop or to leave. Make it unacceptable to use these behaviours as a means of obtaining social wealth. The best advice we give programmers is to leave things better than how we started. We do it with code, so why don't we do it with communities? Thank you for your time.